All right, hey, welcome back to another episode of Super Data Brothers live from DBT Coalesce 2023. I'm joined today by Mr. Benn Stancil. Ben, welcome to the show.
Howdy.
So, formerly of Mode, now at ThoughtSpot.
Correct.
I'm curious, one of the general sentiments I hear on the show floor amongst attendees is they feel like DBT or the modern data stack is maybe going enterprise this year. And if you look at the features, DBT announced that they're targeted more at big companies. Do you think, do you see that happening? Is that kind of the direction this is all moving?
It seems like it. I mean, DBT released a bunch of stuff that was all oriented around managing big projects, complexity. How do we deal with complexity? Obviously, like bigger companies, more complexity. A lot of it was you've got projects managed by different teams, and if you're a 3-person team on a 50-person company, that's not a problem.
Yeah.
So it certainly seems like that is their focus at the moment, which it makes sense in the sort of arc of how businesses mature. Especially to me for DBT, because it's an open source project. It's an open source company. Small companies are going to be much more budget conscious. They're going to be looking for places, like they care less about all of the help that you get by having a provider that you can call when something goes wrong. They're happy to run things themselves in more ways. Big companies want to pay for it. They want to use software they pay for, and they know they have support and all those kinds of things. And so that's where their money is. And so it makes sense for them to build the things that those people are talking about. I think there is an interesting thing that I've heard from some folks, though, that for the early people here that are like the DBT lovers from the community, sort of feel like DBT is now moving away from them and it's not for us anymore or whatever. I think in the moment that is to some extent true, though likely if DBT is to be successful long term, this is their path to get there. 100%. So there's a little bit of like, they've got to leave the community on its own a little bit for some period of time, build sort of a sustainable business, and then that success would come back in a lot of ways. So they go from being, to me, the creators and like owners of the community to being something that's sort of trying to like figure out their own monetization strategy to ultimately becoming kind of a benefactor of it, where they're providing sort of support for it, but they are no longer running it the way that they are today. And I think that's probably the arc of how this goes, and it makes sense, but people will feel it's not sort of an easy transition, but I think it's sort of the natural course of these kinds of things.
And I think what some people will find, like I can tell you as someone who's been around for a little while, like DBT's crowd, it's it's young, it's analytics engineers, it's SaaS companies and tech companies, and I think what people will find is that as DBT matures and goes enterprise, like some of them are going to go with it, right?
Yeah.
Like that's, and maybe when you're 27, you don't feel like you want to do that, but when you're 37, you'll be happy to work for a large, stable company with a stable paycheck and that sort of thing. And so,
and that if that goes the way people want it to go, which who knows, maybe it doesn't, but I suspect if it goes the way people want it to go, it comes back around. It's that the very big companies are the ones that are most supportive of a lot of open source projects. It's not the open source projects that have no big sort of financial backer are the things that end up dying, going stale, that there's some like poor person in a basement somewhere that's trying to maintain this thing and hates their life for it.
Yes.
Whereas if you can be like, oh, this is now Microsoft's project, the community will eventually reap the benefits of that. I think, but you have to go through a phase where the company can get to a size to actually support that. So and
I mean, it's just like we have open source components of good data, and some of them, 'cause we've been around for a while. Some of those is exactly what you describe, right? Mm-hmm. We use some open source component as part of the platform, and now there's some guy in a basement maintaining something that we need in our software. And we've taken over some of those, I think, over time because they have to be maintained for part of our platform. So
and there's like, everybody sort of knows this, but the open source thing, in the early stages, it's a distribution strategy. You are a user that is meant to be monetized at some point in some way. Later, once you're really big, open source becomes more of a, charity is the wrong word, but more of like a genuine, we don't need to monetize this. We are doing this so that we have reach and brand and things like that. And that's like, I think, a truer, more stable way of funding the open source world than this is a lead gen for something we eventually want to sell you. Like that's not
right.
That matters less. And so I think DBT is committed to the open source stuff, it certainly seems, but recognize they can't be committed to it in the same way that they have been committed to it in the past. Which,
Yeah, it makes sense. What do you think? So when it comes to the BI piece, obviously we're both BI guys. Where do you see these sort of things heading? There's been a lot of interest around LLMs and AI integration into BI, and some people, your opinions are all over the place. Some people will say there's not going to be a BI analyst or a data analyst in 5 years because AI will just do it. Other people are highly skeptical of that. Kind of where do you fall in that continuum?
I think I think analysts will continue to exist. There will be a lot of questions that AI can't answer. They might do a slightly different job. I think we're a ways away from, there was like the excitement around, oh my God, I asked this thing a question, it writes a magical SQL query.
Yeah.
Like there's a ton of work to actually make that query work. There's a bunch of different ways you could try to do that, but I think we are still a few years away from like really even being able to reliably have a bunch of companies using things that will just answer these questions in the way that people kind of imagine it today. You can do it in some cases. The company I now work for, ThoughtSpot, has a lot of technology here that does this pretty well. There's other folks that do these similar things. But even in 5 years, where does that go? To me, it is Google doesn't get rid of researchers. It just means they're more effective at what they do, which is the sort of easy answer of like, yes, there'll be a lot of basic questions in reporting that AI probably will help with, fine. There still will be a lot of questions that are like hard, how do we solve this problem, that I think still you have to have someone thinking about it, trying to figure out what to do with it. Data is not, a lot of it is ultimately like human judgment in the end, and there's going to be someone who wants to make that call, so.
Yeah, absolutely. And how do you think, like, what approach do you think data teams should take? Like, would you recommend, should you be kicking the tires on this kind of stuff? Should you be seeing how you can incorporate it? Or in your mind, are we still in a wait and see phase?
I think it's worth kicking the tires. But I would kick the tires sort of carefully to see how well it works for what you do.
Yeah.
Like, I've seen a number of things where people are, for instance, like wanting to build chatbots in Slack. It's sort of their own independent thing. Oh, I built a chatbot. People ask a question, it'll return the dashboard. That's they're using kind of basic integrations with OpenAI and stuff like that. I would not build that, frankly.
Yeah.
Like I think there's a lot of the thing that looks pretty good when you first use it that starts to become like a very shaky. That's not kicking the tires. That's like basically running alpha software.
Yes.
I think it's worth kicking the tires on products and vendors that are selling this stuff. I think it's worth like understanding it and trying to play with it just to see how well it works.
Yeah.
But I don't think I would make like big giant strategic changes as a data team to be like, we are all in on AI generated data models or what. Like we're a ways away from that stuff actually working to that degree. Sure, there are some things that you should do, but I don't know that I would do the entire, like we have a giant strategy for how we're going to implement all this shit.
Yeah, and I think I do feel, I've talked to some people who feel like they're getting pressure from on high. Like the board is going to the CEO saying, what's our AI strategy? And then that's filtering all the way down to, the data team has been told, hey, please deliver us AI. And it's like...
And I mean, there's a lot of, well, I guess two ways to think about that. There's the way of like the data team is being asked to build AI that is a product or something that other people use versus like, as a data team, how are you using AI?
Right.
I think it's like experiment. Yeah, say we tried products that have it integrated, see how it works. But I think the idea of like, oh, we've got to immediately figure out ways to build all of these, like take half of our job and turn it into AI. We got to make all of our decks AI generated. I'm like, all right, try it. If it works, great, use it. Don't be ashamed of using it, but recognize that a lot of those things are still early, basically.
And I do think, like, if you look at the vendors, every vendor, it seems like, is slapping a chatbot on top of a dashboard. And, I think we're going to run into limitations of that pretty quickly.
Yeah, I mean, and there are a handful of folks that have, everybody I think recognizes it. There's a handful of folks I think who are really spending a lot of time thinking about the ways to get this right. Again, to shill for ThoughtSpot. ThoughtSpot is certainly a company that's thought a lot about that.
Yeah.
But there are others. And there's also a lot that is like, oh, it's buzzy. To your point, there is some mandate from on high. How are we using AI? if your vendor just has like an AI thing tacked on, you can be like, well, we're using this.
Here it is.
And so it makes sense why companies would do it, but I think you got to be like sort of evaluate it on its own merits, try it for a while, try it in sort of safe ways for a while. You know, if it doesn't work, then learn something, but you don't need to. There's no reason to like, your marketing team should not just be automatically replacing all of the blog posts they write with AI-generated blog posts. Like, sure, try, see if it works, but nobody in that team would automatically say like, well, we have to use the thing this thing spits out. Like, you know, experiment with it, see where you can make it useful. But
absolutely. So, what's last question?
Yeah.
And I ask this to everybody, so I'll ask it to you. If someone is, entering the data profession today, a young person, fresh out of college, coming on board, or maybe somebody who's changing careers, what piece of advice do you have for them? How do they best navigate this and be successful in the data world?
So we talked about this a little bit yesterday.
Yeah.
One of the things that's interesting about this conference, and this conference a little less so, because as you mentioned, it tends to be a little bit younger, tends to skew more startups, smaller companies, but there are a lot of conferences out there that are not that. I think they're actually pretty useful to go to. And one of the reasons is because you see the entire spectrum of people in their careers. There will be people who are interns who are still in college, there will be people fresh out of college, there will be people who are 30, people who are 40, people who are late stages in their careers that are 65 and thinking about retiring.
Yeah.
Those people represent like the default path of your career. There is somebody, if you go to a conference that has a few thousand people, there is somebody there that is you in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. And so it's like, who in that do you want to be? And like, if you don't want to be any of it, then think about how you change. Like, recognize that this is the current of your career is taking you towards one of these things. And if you just like sort of let the current take you, you will end up as one of those things. Yeah. And that may be very exciting. And if it is, go do it. And know what you're chasing. If it's not exciting, like, figure out why. But I think there was a period of time with data careers where it was like data people can become anything. That's one of the things exciting about it. I think we've matured a little bit past that, where you can see what a data career might become. And so if you're here and you're young and you're trying to figure out like which angle you go and what you're excited about, or if you're excited about this at all and all those sorts of things, like, you're not going to invent something totally new. Find somebody else who is a thing you're very excited about.
Yeah.
Or figure out what that is that you're very excited about, because you're probably going to end up as one of those things.
It's funny, I asked Joe Reese this question a couple weeks ago, and what do you recommend people do when they enter data? And he said, don't. Become a plumber. So that's a viable path too. If you go to a conference and you realize you don't want any of this, consider plumbing.
And I sort of to that point, that question to me, or that thought process works broadly, I think, where like there is somebody in the world that is doing exactly the thing that you will end up doing.
Yeah.
Like, who is the, never meet your heroes, but maybe have a hero that's like a realistic, that's a thing that I am excited about. Because chances are, whatever it is, that you're not going to invent something new. So it's like, what actually are you chasing,
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, thanks for coming on the show again,
awesome.
Ben. Always good to see you. Where can people keep up with you?
Various places on the internet, I guess, mostly. I have a blog. It's a Substack. It's benn.substack.com. That's where most things are.
Yeah.
Basically, on Twitter, it's just Benn Stancil, but Twitter is mostly just like a once a week tweet about what's on the blog. So, I guess LinkedIn too, which is a once a week post about what's on the blog. Like, I don't know, DM me if you want to talk. Otherwise, it's the blog.
All right, cool. Well, thanks for coming on the show.
For sure.
Until next time, take